This time on Poll Hub, has the 50-year quest to reverse the Supreme Court's 1973 Roe v. Wade decision succeeded? The leak on Monday night of a draft opinion doing just that has upended Washington and potentially America in a number of ways. It is such a big deal that we are devoting the entire episode to it. We're going to first look at our extensive polling over the years on abortion and how Americans see the issue. As we've said repeatedly, this is not and has never been a simple pro-life, pro-choice debate. But is overturning Roe something most Americans want? We're going to look at that. Then we'll turn to the political ramifications. Republicans appear to be on the verge of achieving their half-century goal of ending legal abortion in the U.S. If it happens, could it end up being a Pyrrhic victory for them? We're going to investigate. There's more here than we can possibly discuss in a short show. We'll do our best, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm J.D. Dapper.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I'm Lee Marengoff.
On Monday night, one of the bigger bombshells of the last, couple of decades dropped in Washington, a leak to Politico of a draft opinion written by Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito that Politico reported had received a majority of support from the Supreme Court, and the opinion strikes down Roe v. Wade. Just let's be very clear, this is a draft opinion. There has been no ruling. Roe v. Wade has not been overturned. Ruling is expected by the beginning of July at the latest. That is the end of the term for the Supreme Court. So, a couple things. The draft it is written is very, very dense in legal language. It's very long, 90 some odd pages, but it is very, very harsh, if you will, in the way that it describes Roe v. Wade, how it was reached, how the decision was reached, and why it is wrong, fundamentally unconstitutional, and it was a decision that must be overturned 50 years after the court first ruled on it. President Biden, said it was a radical decision. A lot of Republicans have actually not said much about it other than the leak was a bad thing. We may talk about why that is an interesting political move. But what it means is, if it actually happens, there are as many as 20, and probably there are going to be more by the time a ruling is handed down, states that will very quickly after a ruling or immediately ban or severely restrict abortion. So there's the table set for us. Mary, we have done more polling than practically anybody on abortion over many years. And I think we have a lot of data to share that is really illuminating.
First, take a look at some of the more recent polls that have come out on abortion. In fact, the first poll taken after the leak that was done by Politico Morning Consult showed that 50% of Americans think Roe should not be overturned. 28% say it should, and 22% are undecided. Let's go back a couple months. January 2022, a CNN poll showed that 69% thought Roe should not be completely overturned, mirroring the results of the same poll in 2009. 68% had that view, and in 2005, 68% also had that view. So, Jay, just to harken back to what you mentioned about the Marist poll data, we have been polling about the issue of abortion for many, many years. And our polls have been fairly consistent. And what they show is that when you ask the question of whether or not you are pro-life or pro-choice, that's where the split really seems to come about. But the issue is, as we all know, very complicated and much more nuanced. In fact, when you look at the numbers, when we ask it on a 6-point scale, there are small proportions of Americans on either side who believe that abortion should be allowed at any time during a woman's pregnancy, or that it should be completely outlawed. And so really, there is a great deal of consensus among Americans on this issue. The arguments really come about at those polls that I mentioned. So what does this mean, Lee?
Yeah, well, I think that I think the poll data and the media have, they haven't conspired, but they certainly have worked in tandem to give a misimpression of where public opinion is. And I think it's clearer when the question becomes whether Roe should be overturned or not, because that sort of gets away from the labels of pro-life and pro-choice. and those seem to drive the coverage. They have driven traditionally a lot of the polling. And I think they don't, as you both have indicated, do justice to where public opinion is. And the suggestion is that this is, as you've indicated, a much more nuanced argument. It's not that simple. But when you look at the results already with people in front of the Supreme Court and so many states ready to, have a trigger go into effect, and when this is already, the armies have formed on both sides, and the American people are much more in the middle, and do not ascribe to either just a pro-life or pro-choice stance. And having been said, they do want restrictions. They also want exceptions, and those two words are very different in terms of where the discussion goes if you're pro-life or pro-choice. But you can put most of the American people in that bucket of exceptions and restrictions, and that puts in a much more grayer tone to this than we're going to get, which is why I like, personally, I think I like the way we've asked this question over time, but I think it provides clarity on what's going on right now as to whether Roe should be overturned, because I think that has at least a clearer message going forward as to how people are reacting to what's this, as Jay called it, this bombshell that's hit.
So can we just talk about what's at the heart of Roe for just a second? Jay, you reminded us of this just a couple days ago, which is that privacy was really central to the decision in Roe. Now, there is nothing in the Constitution that specifically mentions the right of privacy, but throughout many different decisions, privacy has been codified into law. And so when we think about the issue of privacy, it doesn't just pertain to the issue of abortion. There are lots of different issues out there that if Roe is overturned, it could have a snowball effect. There are lots of different Supreme Court rulings and things that affect people on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so the right to privacy, which again does not exist in the Constitution and has been a bugaboo for conservative constitutionalists really since it was founded. A lot of rulings from the 50s and 60s that they argue created rights that don't exist in the Constitution. And Alito certainly alludes to that in his draft opinion. He spends a lot of time talking about a jurist from the 1700s, in fact. So he goes way back to talk about the original intent. But in the right to privacy, contraception is one. There was a ruling in the 60s, Griswold versus Connecticut. Contraceptives were not legal in many states, which most people under a certain age, maybe 60 or 70 at this point, don't know. That you couldn't buy a condom or an IUD or the pill, which didn't exist at that time. You couldn't buy that legally. The right to privacy was found partially in that decision. Same-sex marriage is based, at least in part, that ruling, allowing for people to get married that are gay, lesbian, transgender, or whatever. That is rooted in the right to privacy too. And I think that is one of the potential blowbacks here, is that if this draft opinion is accepted by the rest of the court and a majority finds that this opinion, as it is written, is their majority opinion, I think the concern is, and I think it's a fair concern, it opens the doors to all kinds of things that our polling has indicated is kind of settled in American public opinion, like the right to be able to buy a contraceptive, and same-sex marriage now, shockingly, has come so far so quickly. So, Lee, it just seems like this is a Pandora's box, and we may be talking about a really big story here that's actually only the start of a very big story.
Well, the Supreme Court is not going to presumably change dramatically in the near future, and we do have a very clear majority right now. Even if Roberts sides with the minority, it's still a 5-4 majority, and the 5 seem pretty locked in terms of moving in the court in a much different direction than is the one that got us here. And clearly, there's some debate in Washington, and there's been some coverage of the recent justices and just how forthcoming they were when they were being, the questioning in the nomination process, when they did talk rather explicitly about Roe being codified in the law of the land. And Senator Collins and others who bought into that are now somewhat displeased with this tentative ruling. I mean, it's you talk about the leak, and obviously that's going to
Draftly, I think it's important to say draft ruling.
sure draft ruling exactly, and that's to my point, which with that amended, we're sort of like got an advanced copy of something that isn't the real thing, and so it's created this massive reaction, and then we're going to have another ongoing reaction when the ruling finally does come down. It will presumably be a lot like what we're discussing, but who really knows? I mean, there could be some modifications.
One thing that interests me, Mary, is that the polling we're talking about has been national polling. There's been very limited, we looked, and there's very limited polling at a state level over the years about abortion. If this is overturned, it goes back to the states, and the states are wildly divergent in the ways that they are looking to regulate or not regulate abortion. But we don't really have any idea what the public opinion is in those states at that level. So I think there's a big, empty kind of black hole there in terms of our knowledge.
When I was reading up and doing some research, the words Wild West really came to my mind. Like there's nothing there. I mean, we're going to be all over the place. And what happens when someone does seek an abortion and then crosses state lines? Will they face some sort of prosecution in a different state from which they came? I mean, there are lots of different questions out there that may not be in the public discourse right now, but certainly will become very evident if Roe were to be overturned. I did want to mention that when we talk about issues like abortion in relation to the Supreme Court, we tend to talk about whether or not the Supreme Court is in step with public opinion. So let's just talk about same-sex marriage for a second, that the court really came along with public opinion. But when we look at the numbers, as Lee pointed out, there is a lot of complexity to this issue. And it's not just that all Americans want this overturned or they want to keep a great deal of restrictions on abortions. What does this say about the court in terms of its reflection on public opinion?
I think it's the potential on this issue and others is that it gets way ahead on getting way too forward on the skis there, and the
which is what conservatives accused the court in 1973 of doing in ruling on Roe.
Exactly, and so the court, traditionally, historically, the court has been sort of a slow reactor to a new current in public opinion. So traditionally, the president and Congress, they may be moving in a direction, but the court, because of its delay, because people are lifetime appointees, it doesn't change as quickly. So it's a real break on change. What we're talking about now is that the court is leading the change. And that's a very, very different role. And then you worry about the legitimacy of the court having traditionally tried to, at least to some degree, be apolitical, although one would argue that's never really been the case. But now they seem to be in front of the partisan divide and exacerbating it by moving this debate in a very decided direction that's very different.
Just keep in mind, there is another probably very prominent example of the court leading public opinion, and that is Loving versus Virginia, which was anti-miscegenation. And the Supreme Court ruled that, no, you can't keep people from different races from marrying. Again, anybody under like 60 or 70 is probably going, what? That was illegal in many states in the US until Loving versus Virginia. At the time, public opinion polling, a vast majority, not a tiny majority, a vast majority of Americans agreed that people of different races should not be allowed to get married. So in that case, the court was way ahead of public opinion. In fact, public opinion didn't cross the pro line to say, yes, people of different races should get married until the 1990s. 30 years after Loving. So yeah, there are examples where the court has been way ahead, but they are few, as you say, Lee. They're few and far between.
And so I think, we could talk, and obviously we're moving in, the legalities and the public opinion into a more discussion of just the politics. And I would say that what the country doesn't need right now is another huge polarizing issue on the table.
Ha! Well,
yeah,
we got it.
Yeah, you got it.
Good luck with that, Lee.
And we have said on, we're pushing 250 episodes of our podcast, and we've talked about polarization on many occasions, and the chasm is widening and widening and widening, and this gap now is only going to be widened by this as we move down this road, because we've now got, talk about affecting the entire political universe. We're going to be dealing with national issues. We're already talking about the relationship of the Senate to the recent appointees to the court. We know that the states are going to now play this bigger role in all this, that we're not going to have a national policy, presumably, on this topic.
So what are the politics of this? Abortion has always been an energizing issue for Republicans, has never traditionally been an energizing issue for Democrats nationally. Where does this fall? What happens?
I was just going to say, just you wait. No, I think this is as the states are ready to trigger new rulings, new laws after the national ruling, and they're ready to go, just looking for the formal declarations to occur, then you're going to see presumably a lot of folks mobilizing. And in this case, I think the Democrats probably will hold the edge because they will be on the outs trying to, react to what's happened. So you have younger people who are going to be upset about this, suburban women, people of color who are disproportionately affected by the changing policy. All those groups that have been sort of slightly dormant, in the last year, as we've been talking about, the mobilization of the Democrats, while they don't seem as enthusiastic as the Republicans are. I'm not so sure that hasn't, going to undergo some kind of shift right now, if we go down this road. I think this has been something that's been forecast, and I think we're likely to go down a much different political universe in terms of red states and blue states. And, the red states aren't going to be universally red, and the blue states aren't going to be universally blue. So you're going to have contentious battles within the states, and then it's going to spill over into the national. So I think we're in for a new and rougher midterm cycle.
Lee, I want to zero in on the female vote in the midterm elections. Talking about mobilization, do you think that this will mobilize that demographic that you mentioned just a few moments ago? Or do you think it's really not going to make much of a difference?
Yeah, I don't think this is a lot about persuasion. I think it's about mobilization. And I think, the question becomes, at what point do people rally one way or another to this? And right now, the group that's been more dormant and more sluggish to get into the political sphere has been the Democrats. Right now they have, the White House, they have Congress, and it's kind of this, kind of like this taking it as it comes attitude, and they have the slimmest of majorities, and now this shows up, and this becomes something that becomes very dangerous for those groups in a personal way.
I think it's telling that two things. One, Democrats raised a whole bunch of money in the 12 hours following this on Monday. Overnight Monday, they raised $7 million without asking. They just raised $7 million. And the other is that Republicans, this has been a quest for 50 years. This has been at the heart of the Republican Party to do this. And on the precipice of victory, they're talking about the leak. Punchbowl News noted that notably you heard, and I'm quoting, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell Tuesday try to get reporters to focus on the leak, not the substance of what was leaked. I think that's very telling that Republicans recognize this may not be a winning issue the way it is playing out. But I do want to just focus on one other aspect of this. We talk a lot about national politics. We talk a lot about the Senate races and president and all that. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin have Democratic governors who are up for election or re-election. They have Republican legislatures, and all three of them have laws on the books that are, could have laws on the books that are essentially trigger laws. These are states that are as swingy as they get in national elections. And it just seems like this is, if you want to see something explode, look at Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. If this ruling comes down, those Republican legislatures try to outlaw abortion with Democrats running for re-election in the gubernatorial race. This just seems like a recipe for, some madness.
Like I said, what we don't need is another polarizing issue, and now you're going really ground zero on what could be that very, heated division that we could be easily looking at. And I think that's, look, we've heard discussion in our, kind of in the political dialogue of the country that the Supreme Court and the Republicans will never undo Roe because they're going to unleash a torrent of reaction that they don't want to have to then deal with. Well, hello, you may get what you asked for. And this is, should the actual ruling be very much what we're hearing from the leak in the document, then I think your point is very well taken. I mean, I think the battle lines will be very clearly drawn. And all of a sudden, the things that we've been talking about, and we've been saying this a lot, let's not jump the gun in terms of what's going to be on the table in October, because we've seen so many issues show up, from Ukraine to COVID to the impeachment of Trump, and all these things that have just shifted to the more recent critical issue of inflation, which we're not talking about today because this is the discussion. So who knows, as we reiterate what's going to be on the table in September and October, this could be very well change the political landscape in a huge way. And I think we're seeing that potentially.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Ashley Marcinek, Athen Hollis, and Emily Fry.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them directly to @MaristPoll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.